The man boy is just doing things that are incredible. And, well, the Monaco curse was there again for Charles Leclerc. What a Monaco Grand Prix, as always. There's Delucia with me. Delucia, first thoughts of yesterday. I mean, how did you feel when the race finished?
I mean, that was a blockbuster of a note. I mean, I would have loved to see that in IMAX, to be honest with you, because it was exactly what we wanted in a race. And for people who said, Monaco's boring, it should leave, it's a monotonous race. I mean, if you look back to when the race started at 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon to the end of it, I mean, it was a long race. There were so many penalties, 12 to be exact. And who would have thunk it? Kimi Antonelli, 5 for 5. Again, this kid is doing incredible things at 19 years old. He's gotten record after record, the youngest person ever to get a Grand Slam. He's also been able to, have a 100% pole to win rate so far. And I feel like where Kimi is now, youngest ever Monaco Grand Prix winner, it's been exceptional for him. Unlike the driver that you're wearing on your hat today, Sash, Charles Leclerc. What a miserable day for him in Monaco. And the thing about Charles Leclerc is it's either a fairy tale or it's an absolute nightmare, especially at his home track. And when he had crashed out towards the end, it was devastating to see. It was a frustrating race for him. He was complaining the entire time about his braking issue. We saw, Stroll crash out at the exact same part before. The track was breaking up. So for someone like Charles Leclerc, you've got to feel bad for him.
Yes, I do feel bad for Charles Leclerc, but you know what? Let's also remember that he made the same mistake in Montreal. And I've worked it out. It's roughly 30 odd points that he's thrown away. In the championships, that is still very, very new, even though Antonelli has this great lead over now Lewis Hamilton and no longer George Russell. That's 30 points that Charles Leclerc has actually, unfortunately, just thrown away. And yes, nobody wants to see anybody crash in any kind of Grand Prix. But this one was, yes, he doesn't want to take the blame. He's upset with Brembo. Brembo have come out trying to defend themselves. Lewis Hamilton is apparently using Carbon Industries brakes from Japan. Now, Charles wants those brakes, etc. So we'll see what happens when we get to Barcelona. But in the only defense for Charles Leclerc is that the whole weekend he was moaning about his brakes, and even in Montreal he was moaning that he was really having these brake difficulties. Of course, the breaking up of the track added to his misery because I think, yes, even though he didn't have any rear brakes, when he tried to turn in, I think he had picked up so much rubble that he just understeered into that fence, just as Lance Stroll had done as well. So yes, Charles Leclerc, unfortunate for him, but that's 30 odd points that he's thrown away, and that's what we've got to remember when it comes towards the end of this season. But let's start from 10th all the way to go to first, because you've said some great things about Kimi Antonelli, and I'll give my viewpoints in a short while. At one stage, it was Sergio Perez for Cadillac who had the point. Then it was Hulkenberg, I think, who was in seventh, who had great points. And then eventually, when all of the penalties, and I mean, I don't know if it had anything to do with the FIFA World Cup starting this week, but with all of the penalties that were given out yesterday, and most of them for speeding in the pit lane, Aston Martin scored a point at Monaco against, I think if you had taken a bet and said Aston Martin were going to score a point, I think you would have won a fortune on any kind of betting site. But Fernando Alonso got a point. It's beyond belief.
I don't think there was any team that was celebrating more than Aston Martin at that point because it was so unpredictable towards the end. And to see them come out with at least a point, given the tumultuous season that they've had, it's an incredible feat. And also to see that it was Cadillac or Aston Martin taking home that point really does put into perspective that battle for 10th and 11th in the championship. So well done to Aston Martin. I'm sure, Sash, you were elated when you found out about that. Of course, Sergio Perez getting that penalty for having a false start. He was in the wrong grid blocks, not once, but twice with the restart as well. And if you look at the way Fernando Alonso has been racing, there have been moments of brilliance throughout the season, here and there. We always say that as long as they've, completing the entire Grand Prix, they've achieved some sort of victory. And, it finally came to fruition. And I think maybe it was the luck of having Lawrence Stroll's massive yacht right next door to them that gave some extra luck. But I'm just glad that they were able to, get some points on the board after what has been a treacherous season for them.
And also just a completely bizarre strategy. They started on the medium tires, where it stayed out for 3 laps, and then went on softs until basically we had the safety car, and then they were able to change tires. So I think they were treating it purely as a data gaining Grand Prix. And there's a classic saying: you got to be in it to win it. And unfortunately, Lance crashed his car, but Alonso kept it on the black stuff and miraculously came out with a point. So well done to him. A team that was under pressure the whole weekend and has been for the last couple of races. Started off well, but Haas have got to up their game, because you've got the likes of Audi that are basically chomping at their heels. And Esteban Ocon and Ollie Beerman don't seem to be getting on exceptionally well at the moment, but Ocon managing to get through in ninth position, getting, I think, much needed points for that team, and also just a little bit of confidence boosting for them, because I think they really are on the back foot when they see what the rest of the midfield are doing, Williams as well as Audi, who have been super impressive and looked really solid yesterday. And I felt desperate for Nico Hulkenberg, and I'll get to primarily the reason for that a little later.
Yeah, I think, you've summed it up so nicely. I think in comparison to where all the other midfield teams are, Haas has kind of fallen by the wayside in comparison to where they were last year, because towards the end of the season, they were battling for the last few points, 8, 9, 10. And I think where they are now, yes, we've got Ocon in the points. He's done well in Monaco before. He was in P3 in 2023 as well. So, I'm quite happy for Ocon, because I don't think I've seen him smile that much, since last year. So very happy for him to have that confidence boost, and also to bring some good morale to the team. Monaco is always going to be a challenging track, but he really did pick up some of the points when we saw Sainz get knocked out, which I'm sure that, just watching that unfold with Nico Hulkenberg getting that tag towards the end after the restart, it was devastating, because we were all hoping for, a Williams double point finish, but unfortunately it was only Alex Albon who was able to score some points in that 8th position.
Yeah. And speaking of Williams, they tried to do a very, very interesting strategy with Albon to let Sainz go through after his pit stop, back up the pack so that they could basically get themselves into the points for both of their teams. Didn't work out their way, but it did allow Albon to actually get somewhere. But here's something that I was unaware of. And Delucia, over the last couple of weeks, and also there's always been this huge expectation from Williams, and I've always backed them, and I've always said I don't know what has gone wrong. Considering they've got James Vowles, they've got 2 fantastic drivers over there, and I'm sitting going, hold on a second, there's got to be something else that is going on at Williams, that all of a sudden the car was very, very heavy. There doesn't seem to be much direction. Now, all of a sudden, I find out that there's some shenanigans going on between Dorrington Capital, who own Williams, and one of their former executives, Charles Schwartz. Now, this is all happening behind the scenes. However, it's going to have a huge effect on the team morale and also the team direction. So it's something to watch very, very carefully. I think they were clever in their idea yesterday. It just didn't execute. But I think Albon will be very happy that he managed to actually get ahead of Carlos again, and of course get those points. I think much needed for that team, especially after reading that there are some political issues going on with Williams at the moment. So I'm glad for them. Now we get to Pierre Gasly.
Pierre Gasly.
Oh, I felt desperate for him. Absolutely desperate for him, finishing on the podium on the track in 3rd place, and then getting these multiple penalties. I mean, that's desperate. He's French. you could see he was so emotional about that. And Gasly's not one to show his emotion too often. So I felt desperately sorry for Gasly yesterday and Alpine, because I think they were really, really a top class team.
And I called it last week when I said to you, I have a feeling that at some point during the season, we're going to see an Alpine on the podium. And because they've done it in Monaco before, it was likely they would do it again. I was absolutely heartbroken for Pierre because he just had a phenomenal race. I mean, after the safety car restart, the way that he was able to get in front of Hadjar, really just maximize the start and have that overtake really did work in his favor. He did everything right. The team did everything right. And then he got nailed with that 2 times 5-second penalties. One behind the safety car, which he got, and one for speeding in the pit lane. And a lot of people have been wondering, why has all of these drivers gotten these penalties for speeding in the pit lane? And the FIA have come out and they've said it's because of the way that these drivers would have entered the pit. Some of them would have taken a shortcut, and because
Correct.
the detection zones are right there, it goes according to when your tire goes in first. So that's exactly when it starts. So even though the drivers did go down to 60 kilometers per hour, they were penalized for going 0.1 kilometers per hour over the speed limit. And that's why we saw people like Gasly, like George Russell, Carlo Pinto. We also had Piastri, who was caught
Hamilton.
up in that as well. Hamilton was the first one who it happened to as well. So with all of that being said, you have to feel sorry for Pierre Gasly because they did everything right. It was just the way that they'd gone into the pit lane. And they have done a right to review. Alpine have done that. But the problem I have with that is if they're going to get away with it and give Pierre Gasly that P3, you have to then take all of those penalties that you've given out, all 8 of them, and reverse all those decisions, because then it affects everyone. And then all of a sudden we have a whole different top 10. So,
Yeah.
I was so desperate for him to get on that podium, but unfortunately it's just the way the cookie crumbles. And we know that Alpine has speed. It's now just a matter of, can they do it again later on the season? I'm still optimistic that they can do something.
Yeah, I was very impressed with Alpine. Listen, nothing's going to happen with their objection to the FIA. When you take on the FIA when it comes to sporting regulations, believe you me, it's very, very seldom that you ever win a case, and there's no ways that they're going to win this case. Bernie Collins from Sky reporting yesterday, she actually described it and explained it exceptionally well, much better than any of her fellow Sky reporters who are mainly just average. Anyway, now we move on. Racing Bulls. Arvid Lindblad, Liam Lawson. What a result for the team! They were jumping into the harbour in Monaco. It was an outstanding drive from both of them. Both of them also in qualifying. So happy for both of them because I think Lawson has been under a tremendous amount of pressure, and to keep everything going the way that they did at Monaco, that was probably the result of the weekend when it came to team performance.
Absolutely. And I think the best part about it is Liam Lawson coming out at the end of the race and saying his car was in a million pieces before the start of the Grand Prix. And just before they had gone onto the grid, they'd managed to fix everything up. He said he had no idea whether he was even going to start the Grand Prix. So to be able to have done the job that he did and to nail it, P5 for him, Arvid in 6th, their best results individually as a team, collecting a whole bunch of points. It really has been wonderful to see this Racing Bulls team come alive and be consistent, because that's what we've been missing in the past, that consistency. And I think this driver combination with the two of them together really does work so well. So I'm very, very happy to see how well the Racing Bulls have done. I think in terms of the midfield, aside from Alpine, it looks so tight with them, coming closer to them, getting that in points in the constructors battle as well, P6. So I'm really, really happy to see how they've come along and to see the voice come alive, because I mean, if you look at where Arvid was last week, he couldn't even start the race. He also had a very similar issue to what Max Verstappen had this weekend. I think it's really incredible to see how they've just been able to come back and really just take the bull by the horns, literally.
Yeah, no, fantastic result for Racing Bulls. So happy for them as well. Then we get to a guy who nearly landed up on the podium. and that is Oscar Piastri. And McLaren had an awful weekend. In the race, yes, they were quick, but when you're stuck behind traffic, unfortunately, it's just one of those things. That is how Monaco goes, and that's why qualifying is so, so critical. And when Norris got stuck behind Gasly, there was nothing he could do about it. They just waited and waited and eventually managed to get an undercut. But what concerns me is, number one, is Norris with another mechanical kind of failure with the Mercedes power unit, which will definitely worry them. And Piastri, even though, I mean, he nearly landed up in the podium, fantastic result for them at their 1000th Grand Prix, only finishing fourth. They'll be super disappointed with it, but they will take it, considering that they seem to be in a little bit of no man's land at present.
Mm.
They're not really finding the groove, whether it comes to qualifying and definitely when it comes to their setup.
Well, let's just talk a little bit about Lando Norris because he's the one, he's our champion, our reigning champion at the moment. But
Mm,
out of the 6 races we've had so far, he's only participated in 3 of those
yeah.
and been able to even compete in those races. China, he was out before they even started. We had Canada, where he was out as well last time out, and then this time as well, another mechanical issue. So with Lando, it's kind of disappointing to see where he's been at, and a lot of it does come to a reliability crisis, as I've dubbed it, because
Mm.
there are so many issues that even McLaren don't have the answers for. They've tried to work it out, they've tried to, medicate these issues, but it seems to be far more prevalent than what we are actually seeing, beneath the surface of everything. And I think also with Lando in particular, it's so discouraging, I think, for him when you see your teammate, who, yes, is in the middle of no man's land, but is still able to get some really good points for the team. I think when your car just breaks down on you, there's nothing you can do in those circumstances. So I'm hoping that when we go to Spain next week, well, this week actually, I
Yeah.
think that maybe that'll be a bit of a reset. It's, those are one of the tracks where you go to and everything is just evened out for everybody. But I think if you look where McLaren is, they are really just struggling to stay afloat. But I do appreciate what Oscar was able to do, because for someone who was struggling as much as his teammate, he certainly did put on a show for us. And they have to be proud of getting some points on the board. But in terms of the constructors' battle, it really just seems to go all the way towards Mercedes and Ferrari at this point.
Yeah, very much a slight two-horse race at present. So let's get a look at Red Bull. The qualifying on Saturday was just outstanding. It was perfection personified. Afterwards, Max came out and said, if anybody beats that time, then they deserve to. And Antonelli managed to do it. Leclerc, of course, just by the way, he was actually up in the sector that he went through and unfortunately clipped the wall. Ifs, buts, that's what Formula One is about. But an unbelievable qualifying from Max and an unbelievable qualifying from Antonelli. Unfortunately, we didn't see what was going to actually happen at turn one, because Max's car basically didn't start, got a little bit of power, was told to bring it home. It was desperate for Max, desperate for Red Bull, and I think desperate for the fans, because if there was one person that was going to be able to chase Kimi Antonelli and put pressure on him, it was definitely going to be Max Verstappen. We saw it as the race unfolded. Ferrari just don't have the pace to chase that. But I think Max would have been able to chase Kimi Antonelli. But that is how Formula One goes. It's just unpredictable. You don't know what is going to happen. Max has matured in such a way that he just took it on the chin and said, well, he went home because it was only 500 meters away, and watched the race there, had some lunch, and then came back and did his media duties. But it was disappointing, I think, for everybody that Max wasn't in that fight.
Absolutely. And I think for him as well, he felt the same, because you're so ready. And I think he would have gotten such a great start off the line as well. But again, it's this issue that we saw with Lindblad as well, where he couldn't get his car into gear and then there was just no power all of a sudden. So is it the Ford power units that we're seeing really struggling here? But at the same time, we also have this issue of Max describing it as the engine just dropped dead. So what
Mm,
does that mean in future for us? Is this something that's going to recur again? Because if you remember in the race as well, Hadjar had very similar issues. He was
correct.
complaining the entire 78 laps, I have no power, there is something wrong. And they said, no, we're trying to figure it out, or just go with it, just keep on racing. There is an engine problem here at some point when we look at how they've been racing, and I really appreciate the way that Hadjar just managed to keep his head down, even though he was frantic at some moments. He certainly doesn't have the maturity of, Verstappen at this point, but I think the way that in comparison he was able to handle himself to get that P3, obviously P4 on track, I think that was really incredible. But I think going into Spain, it is going to be a very, very tight battle between Verstappen. His first win was in Barcelona in Spain in 2016. I remember that was his first win. Now we're going there again this week, and is it going to be the same? Is it going to be Kimi versus Max? We'll have to wait and see. But I think Red Bull so far, they are strong. It's just I'm a bit nervous and apprehensive to see how their power issue is going to affect them later on in the season.
I wouldn't be surprised to see both Hadjar and Verstappen taking new power units this weekend in Barcelona. And yeah, Isaac Hadjar was what do you say, animated as always over the radio. But he was definitely having some kind of issues. And regardless of all of his penalties or whatever, I mean, he's a podium placer at Monaco. So well done to the young guy. He's just got to start learning to keep himself a little bit more in check. Especially, I think, as we go forward, when he's going to be under a lot more pressure to ensure that he's as fast as Max, because I think once they fine-tune that Red Bull power unit together with Ford, once they start really understanding what is going on, means that Hadjar is going to have to ensure that he's right up there with Max as well. So now we get to Ferrari driver Lewis Hamilton, and there was some girl there. I don't know. There was got more TV time than anybody else. Some girl called Kim. Who is this person, and why was she wearing Ferrari headphones? I don't care. But Lewis Hamilton drove I wouldn't say spectacular race. I would just sit there and say he drove a solid race. They didn't have the pace to match Mercedes-Benz, but he kept his nose out of trouble. He didn't he had to back off. He wanted to preserve everything. The pit stops were decent. They double stacked at the time that they needed to. And Lewis comes home with another second place. He's 8th in Monaco, so an outstanding achievement for him. And now all of a sudden, Lewis Hamilton is second in the championship.
I mean, that's a miracle. The last time we had that was back when he was battling Max Verstappen for the title. So welcome back, Lewis. It's nice to have you at the party. I think, a lot of what comes down to is the fact that he was just able to maintain pace and to be able to hold off those behind him. But with that being said, there was so much going on behind him that he didn't have to worry about 3rd, 4th, and 5th because they were having their own battles. So if you look at where Hamilton is, I think you would say he's far happier in this car. Charles Leclerc was complaining quite a bit, as you mentioned earlier, that there was a difference in parts. But interestingly enough, Lewis has said in the press conference after the Grand Prix that he had quite a big hand in developing this car this year. He spent a lot of time working with, the engineers back at the factory, trying to develop something that's also aligned to his driving style, because the old car, he said, did kind of favor Charles Leclerc a little bit more, given the fact that Charles was there for years. And Lewis said that he spent so much time of his free time just trying to figure out the car, and it's worked out in his favor. If you look at where he is right now, you can see how relaxed he is in the car, how much fun he's having, battling with Kimi and Hadjar, and the fact that he was on the podium. Even the ages of Hadjar and Kimi combined were not as old as Hamilton, but he still has the youthful spirit in him and the urge to learn and to stay on top of things. And that you have to appreciate, because you know what? Anything can happen in a Formula One season. Yes, Kimi's running away with him at the moment, but remember, the same thing happened with Oscar Piastri at this point last year. So things can change so quickly, where we all of a sudden see the surge in power from Ferrari, and then all of a sudden we see Lewis Hamilton getting his 8th title. It's still very possible because we're not even 3/4 of the way into the season.
Yeah, there's a long way to go. Even though there's a 66-point lead at the moment, don't read much into it at the moment. Antonelli now, of course, will get the correct guidance as to how to manage most of the season, but he's a racer and he'll go out there. Now, his teammate, and I've always been a defender of George Russell. I've always said how good he is and how fast he is. But he gets onto the phone Hadjar's holding me up. Norris is holding me up. Everyone's holding me up. Yes, Mercedes messed up in the pits. He got the 5 second penalty. They didn't serve it correctly. Of course, he gets the drive through penalty. We have a race restart. And all of a sudden, George Russell, who's got a car that is lightning fast, backs up the pack to such an extent that, in my opinion, it was exceptionally dangerous. Exceptionally dangerous the way that he backed up the pack, and I firmly believe that when they get into the drivers' briefing this weekend before Barcelona, there's going to be a lot said about it. I think the stewards are also going to come down on him and saying, "Listen, fair play when it comes to strategy and tactics, the way that Williams managed to do their sort of swap with Albon and Sainz. But when you back up a pack in Monaco, where it is exceptionally dangerous, just as it is, I think you're putting, drivers' safety into question, and I was not happy the way that George Russell behaved yesterday, and maybe karma actually took its place where he fell out of the points. So I think it was unnecessary the way that he drove. He knew that he was going to have to take the drive-through penalty, and it was unnecessary to do what he did. But on the other flip side, you've got Kimi Antonelli, where 2 laps after the restart just bangs in another fastest lap just to say, hello, here I am. I'm the new kid on the block. And he just drove with the sense of maturity and freedom that is very uncanny in Monaco. And he's going to be very quick for the rest of the season, undoubtedly, regardless of Ferrari upgrades and Red Bull upgrades. Kimi Antonelli is the man to beat.